How one story exposed America's broken justice system. On a spring morning in June 2015, a young man tied a cord from an air conditioner to his neck in his childhood bedroom. His name was Kalief Browder. He was 22. He had never been convicted of a crime. He had spent 3 years on Rikers Island, half of them in solitary confinement, awaiting a trial that never came. The charges were dismissed. The damage was not. When he died, the city called it a tragedy. But inside New York's criminal justice apparatus, it was a memo, an evidence file that proved the entire system was functioning exactly as built. This is not a tribute. It's an autopsy. A dissection of how one boy's ordeal revealed the architecture of American injustice. Kalief Browder's story has been told many times, by documentarians, activists, and politicians. But beneath the emotion lies a forensic truth few have examined. Browder's life was not destroyed by a single mistake. It was consumed by a system that incentivized delay, rewarded silence, and defined justice as efficiency. This film is not about one wrongful imprisonment. It's about a mechanism, an interlocking machine of policing, prosecution, and incarceration, that depends on the vulnerability of the poor to sustain itself. We will trace the forces that shaped his fate. The bail economy that turned freedom into a privilege. The prosecutorial culture that confuses pressure with justice. The carceral infrastructure that treats waiting as punishment. Kalief Browder was not an outlier. He was a diagnostic test for a nation in denial. May 15, 2010. Kalief Browder, a 16-year-old high school student from the Bronx, was walking home from a party with a friend. A police car stopped them near Arthur Avenue. A stranger had just reported that his backpack was stolen weeks earlier. He pointed at Browder and said, "That's him." No warrant. No physical evidence. Within minutes, Browder was handcuffed, booked, and charged with second-degree robbery. Because he was on probation for a previous youth incident, a joyride in a truck, the judge set bail at $3,000. His family couldn't afford it. He was sent to Rikers to wait. In New York's court system, 90% of defendants take plea deals. The rest wait. Each postponement, called an adjournment, extends the case by weeks or months. Browder refused to plead guilty. He insisted on trial. That decision was heroic and fatal. Across 33 months, his case was called 31 times. Each appearance ended with the same sentence: people not ready. Translation: the prosecutor was not prepared, but the defendant stayed in jail. The system's incentive was clear: delay was leverage. The longer Browder waited, the more pressure to plead. When he arrived at Rikers, the Robert N. Davern Center was still known by its nickname, the Gladiator School. It was 2010, but the conditions had barely changed from the 1990s. Browder, 5'7" and 140 pounds, was placed in a dorm with older inmates. Within days he was attacked. Beatings were a rite of passage. Guards looked away or watched like spectators. Surveillance footage later released by The New Yorker shows him slammed to the ground by a guard while handcuffed. The officer was never disciplined. The island functioned as a social experiment in impunity, and Browder was its data point. After defending himself in a fight, Browder was charged with assault on staff and sent to solitary confinement. The box, 6 by 8 feet of steel and concrete. He spent 17 months there. Solitary was supposed to be disciplinary, not administrative. But DOC used it as overflow housing for young men they deemed disruptive. In practice, it was psychological slow violence. He missed his brother's wedding, his 17th and 18th birthdays, his own sense of time. A 2014 psychological report would later describe the effect as temporal collapse, a state where past, present, and future blur into one continuous sentence. By 2013, the alleged victim had returned to Mexico. The prosecutor finally dropped the charges. Kalief was free. Except he wasn't. He returned home with nightmares, paranoia, and severe depression. He studied for his GED, spoke at rallies, and became a symbol of reform, a reluctant martyr still alive. But Rikers followed him home. He told his mother, "They took my mind." Bail is not punishment. It is supposed to guarantee a defendant's return to court. But in practice it is the front door of inequality. In 2010, the median bail for a felony in New York City was $5,000. Half of those charged could not afford even $2,500. A 2013 Vera Institute study found that 43% of Rikers detainees were held solely because they were too poor to pay. Kalief Browder was one of them. $3,000 became a life sentence measured in waiting. If his mother had produced $300 through a bondsman, he would have gone home that night. But poverty turns time into collateral. Every day in jail adds pressure to plead guilty, because the only other currency is freedom itself. That pressure sustains the court's efficiency metrics and the jail's population numbers. Assistant district attorneys in the Bronx handle hundreds of open cases at once. Their promotions, as former prosecutors admitted, depend on conviction rates and closure speed, not on justice delivered. Refusing a plea clogs the system. So the system retaliates with inertia. Each adjournment generated overtime for court officers, paperwork for clerks, and time credits for prosecutors, preparing discovery. For a defendant like Browder, every continuance meant another month in a cage. In 2016, a Bronx DA internal audit revealed that over 23% of felony cases older than 3 years were still pending, most involving defendants on Rikers. Delay was not a bug, it was a tactic. It starved patience until surrender looked like relief. Rikers is sustained by movement, thousands of daily transfers between borough courts and the island. Each busload represents revenue, overtime for officers, per diems for vendors, fuel contracts, meal deliveries. DOC's 2012 budget shows $97 million in annual transportation costs alone. Reducing jail population would collapse that internal economy. So efficiency remained a slogan, not an objective. The longer detainees stayed, the more predictable the funding cycle. Browder's 3-year detention, though unlawful in spirit, was financially ordinary. Solitary confinement functioned as behavioral currency. A 2014 New York City Board of Correction audit confirmed that adolescents were sent to isolation for infractions as trivial as unauthorized talking. Each placement required paperwork, medical sign-off, and officer escort, hours of billable activity in a stagnant system. To DOC commanders, control equaled order. To inmates, it translated as erasure. Browder's 17 months in isolation were justified administratively as maintaining institutional discipline. In human terms, it was the state manufacturing despair to preserve its own logic. A psychiatrist who examined Browder after his release wrote, "He exhibits symptoms of captivity-induced trauma typically observed in POWs, not civilian detainees. The machinery of punishment had transcended law and entered ritual." In 2014, The New Yorker published Jennifer Gonnerman's article, Before the Law. For the first time, the public saw surveillance footage, Browder beaten by guards, thrown to the floor while handcuffed. The video circulated globally, gathering more views in a week than any Department of Correction press release in history. Officials responded with committees, young adult strategy, enhanced supervision housing, therapeutic alternatives. Budgets were announced, nothing structurally changed. Public outrage was converted into administrative funding. The system metabolized exposure the way an organism absorbs pain. It built scar tissue over the wound and continued functioning. After Browder's suicide in 2015, Mayor Bill de Blasio promised a new era for city jails. Solitary for juveniles was formally banned in 2016. But auditors found the same cells renamed secure units, with identical conditions. By 2020, over 300 detainees under 21 had spent time in these rebranded boxes. Reform had become linguistic camouflage, old cruelty under new acronyms. A former DOC deputy commissioner admitted anonymously to The Intercept, "If you rename the cage, the public stops looking for it." Medical and mental health care on Rikers was privatized through Horizon Health, later Yes Care, a firm repeatedly fined for negligence nationwide. Between 2009 and 2015, the company billed New York City over $140 million. During that period, inmate suicides rose 39%. Contract renewal was automatic. Performance penalties were cheaper than replacement. Thus, even Browder's psychiatric decline became another line item in a profitable budget. The same pattern applied to food vendors, telecom providers, commissary distributors. Suffering circulated as commerce. After Browder's death, crime headlines spiked again. Tabloids equated reform with danger. City Hall, under pressure, quietly expanded jail capacity, temporarily, while planning community-based alternatives. Fear re-legitimized incarceration. Politicians regained moral cover by invoking public safety, even as data showed violent crime near historic lows. In this loop, tragedy fuels justification. Browder's name entered campaign speeches as a symbol of compassion, while his reality funded the same institutions that broke him. Every detail of Browder's case, poverty, bail, delay, abuse, suicide, existed not at the margins but at the center of American justice. He was the average defendant rendered visible. A 2017 federal study of urban jails found that 2/3 of detainees nationwide were pretrial, and nearly half were there solely for inability to pay bail. Average stay, 45 days. In New York City it was 60 days. For Browder it was 110. His story wasn't exceptional, it was simply documented. After the New Yorker article and the 2015 suicide, Kalief Browder became a national reference point. HBO and Time produced documentaries. Barack Obama cited his name while announcing federal solitary reform guidelines. Celebrities donated to his family's foundation. But inside city government, the same week Obama spoke, Rikers logged 3 new adolescent assault cases. Change became performance. Hearings, panels, op-eds, ritualized guilt without structural sacrifice. A DOC veteran told investigators, "We turned Browder into a press cycle. Then we went back to work." In 2017, New York State passed Raise the Age, ending automatic adult prosecution for 16 and 17-year-olds. The legislation was marketed as Browder's legacy. Yet between 2018 and 2021, more than 900 youths were still held on Rikers due to temporary facility shortages. Names changed, protocols changed, the geography of punishment did not. Every reform bore his ghost but none exorcised it. The financial wake was measurable. Between 2015 and 2020, New York City paid over $37 million in settlements linked to Rikers abuse claims, half citing solitary confinement. Auditors estimated that closing the island would save $200 million annually, but those savings threatened too many contracts. So the city chose indemnity over prevention. Money became apology. Academia, philanthropy, and media transformed Browder's suffering into currency. Conferences titled Kalief Browder and the Future of Justice proliferated. Non-profit budgets swelled. Speakers described systemic cruelty with the comfort of professional distance. One activist quietly admitted, "We built careers on a kid we couldn't save." The irony was complete. His death generated a bureaucracy of remembrance that mirrored the one that destroyed him. Venita Browder, Kalief's mother, died in 2016 of heart failure at 63. Friends called it stress-induced. The city offered condolences, no official apology ever arrived. In 2019, the Browder family filed a wrongful death suit. In 2020, the city settled for $3 million, roughly $2,700 per day of his confinement. A precise price tag on institutional failure. The Department of Justice's 2014 Civil Rights Report had already warned. Rikers Island fails to protect adolescents from harm, violates constitutional rights, and relies on a culture of violence as management. Browder's case validated every line. Yet no federal receivership followed. Instead, monitors were appointed, budgets expanded, oversight diffused. The pattern repeated, the act of investigating substituted for the act of dismantling. To understand Browder's legacy is to study silence. His absence rewired public empathy. He became proof that the system's cruelty was not theoretical. Yet the moral shock decayed with each news cycle. Sociologists later termed the effect empathy fatigue. The more the story circulated, the less it hurt, until it functioned as narrative background noise. Rikers remained, viewers felt informed. Across the U.S., counties referenced the Browder problem when defending bail reform initiatives. Illinois, New Jersey, and California adopted limits on cash bail. Louisiana courts cited his case in appeals. But implementation fractured. Some states replaced cash bail with algorithmic risk assessments that encoded the same racial bias. The machinery evolved, the outcomes did not. By 2024, reports confirmed adolescents still held in isolation on the island, under protective custody labels. Videos leaked showing guards assaulting detainees almost identically to Browder's footage a decade earlier. The institution had learned to survive exposure by renaming its brutality. One monitor concluded, Rikers doesn't reform. It rebrands. Kalief Browder's name is carved into the rhetoric of reform but absent from policy design. He proved that pretrial detention is punishment and that poverty dictates guilt. He revealed that America's justice system measures success by throughput, not redemption. Yet in the decade since his death, the jail population has begun to climb again. Public fear, political caution, and bureaucratic inertia rebuilt the walls he exposed. The system absorbed his lesson and weaponized it. Empathy became immunity. Kalief Browder did not die from neglect. He died from design. A structure made to process bodies faster than it processes truth left him no place to stand. He once told a reporter, I'm not mad that I did the time. I'm mad that I had to prove I was innocent. That sentence remains the country's epitaph. The search for truth continues.